WGDR playing field and WGDH Hardwick Goddard College Community Radio.
Listening to In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio on WGDR 91.1 and WGDH 91.7.
Good morning, Canna friends and Canna foes. This is another episode of In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio. We are very excited today to have a studio full of some exciting people. Our resident health and wellness segment producer, Jessalyn Dolan's in the studio with us today. Thank you, Jessalyn, for coming down. And we're here for Dr. Bob today, who is in studio, which I'm very excited about. Guys, don't go anywhere. This is going to be an amazing show. As always, our phone lines are open. You can give us a call, 802-454-7762. We'll get you right to the board here. And we'll get the show rolling here. First of all, again, like I said, we have Dr. Robert in the studio with us today. Jessalyn Dolan in the studio with us today, and we'll have Brendan Barberio on the line. So, guys, don't go anywhere. It's going to be a great show. Timothy Fair from Vermont Cannabis Solutions, who just won a Hetty's Award. Congratulations to them. Will also be joining us later in the show. Don't go anywhere. This is In the Weeds with Joseph Smith and Brandon Barberio. This is Joseph Smith of In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio, and now for your local and national Canada news for August 2nd, 2019. A new study, adolescents' cannabis exposure not associated with structural brain changes in adulthood. The use of cannabis during adolescence is not associated with the structural brain differences in adulthood, according to a longitudinal data published by the journal Drug and Alcohol Dependence. Investigators from Arizona State University and the University of Pittsburgh assessed the impact of adolescent cannabis exposure on brain morphology in adulthood. Researchers tracked different adolescence patterns from no cannabis use, defined as 4 days of use or less, to heavy use, defined as, on average, 782 days of use in a cohort of 1,000 teenage boys. A subset of participants subsequently underwent structural brain imaging in adulthood between the ages of 30 to 36. Scientists examined 14 brain regions of interest. They concluded the pattern of cannabis use typically seen in community-dwelling adolescents does not appear to have a lasting effect on the brain. The findings are consistent with those of several prior brain imaging studies, such as those here, and here. A recent meta-analysis published in the journal JAMA Psychiatry reported that youth cannabis exposure does not appear to be associated with any sustained cognitive deficits in adulthood. Commenting on the new study, Normal Advisory Board member Mitch Earlywine, professor of psychology at the State University of New York in Albany, said, "These data replicate previous work to reveal that even some of the most frequent users of cannabis do not show changes later in brain structure. The measures are very sensitive, and researchers look throughout the brain very thoroughly. Let's hope that these findings mitigate some of the alarmist cries that have often persisted and dominated this narrative." Alaska governor pulls funding for hemp pilot program. Alaska's hemp cultivation pilot program has been completely defunded, and the crops being grown by the state under the program have now been destroyed. The Department of Natural Resources has destroyed 1,000 hemp plants being grown at the Plant Materials Center in Palmer, as they no longer had enough staff to care for the plants. Governor Mike Dunleavy told KTVA that he had pulled the program's $375,000 funding because currently there is no existing industry to support a state-funded program. However, without the pilot program, there can be no legal industry within the state. The bill establishing a pilot program for hemp was approved by the Senate in 2017 and unanimously by the House last year. and was largely supported by the state's farming community. The measure was signed into law by then-Governor Bill Walker as an independent. According to the fiscal note attached to the legislation, application and registration fees paid by the farmers to grow the crop were expected to make up for any money paid by the state to get the program off the ground. The Natural Resource Department expected at least 25 farms to register to grow the crops in the first year, but only had issued a proposed regulations to govern the program on May 31st. Dunleavy's hemp program cut was part of a larger action that closed 2 of the 4 PMC greenhouses and laid off 17 divisions of agriculture positions, more than half of its workforce. Massachusetts gives first social equity program provisional license. The first cannabis dispensary to benefit from the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission Economic Empowerment Program is expected to be open by late October and is the first to get approval within Boston city limits. The Economic Empowerment Program is Massachusetts' social equity initiative for the cannabis space. Kobe Evans is the native of Dorchester, which historically has high cannabis arrest rates, a key requirement for application of the state's Economic Empowerment Program. His business partner, Kevin Hart, grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and Virginia. Both men are African American. Requirements for the social equity program include having a past drug conviction or being the spouse or a child of an individual with a drug conviction or having lived in an area of disproportionate impact for at least 5 years and having an income that doesn't exceed 400% of the federal poverty level. Applicants must have lived in Massachusetts for at least 12 months. Under the program, 123 social equity licenses will be available to qualifying applicants, but according to the report, the CCC has received only 10 applications. Evans says the application process, which can cost between $50,000 and $60,000. Evans called the politics the hardest part of netting a business license because the state law requires businesses enter into host community agreements, which allows municipalities to collect up to 3% of a business's gross sales for up to 5 years before the CCC will even consider an application. Evans and Hart said they plan to hire individuals from a community, including those with criminal records, at their shop and hope to eventually launch a business incubator. Former CIA profiler claims most packaged cannabis products are fake. The Central Intelligence Agency, which is more commonly referred to as the CIA or simply the agency, has a dark history of using drugs to further its agenda. We know they ran a mind control program back in the 50s where they fed prisoners and the mentally ill high doses of LSD and watched them dance on the edge of a total breakdown. We also know that the CIA has extensive involvement in the international drug trafficking trade. But what most Americans may not be aware of, according to a former CIA profiler turned cannabis industry tech entrepreneur, is that the majority of the packaged cannabis products sold across the United States are counterfeits. There have always been criminal organizations creating knockoffs of popular brands and to be passed off to the consumer as the real thing. Everything from fake designer clothing to prescription drugs is distributed every year all across the globe. And it's a money-making machine, too, this business of peddling fraudulent merchandise. A recent report from the Harvard Business Review shows the dastardly art of selling phony products is worth nearly $4.5 trillion. Marijuana is no exception in this twisted sea of swindlers and cheats, especially where vape carts are concerned. A story published earlier this year in Marijuana Business Magazine demonstrates how imitation cannabis products have become a massive problem for the legal marijuana community. It is not uncommon, the publication said, to find bogus versions of popular pot brands from Kingpens, Brass Knuckles, and the heavy hitters. These frauds are often distributed in areas of Prohibition, and they are also turned up in states where cannabis is legal. In fact, at least at the last MJ BizCon in Las Vegas last November, legit cannabis manufacturers were said to have discovered counterfeits of their brands during the event. In a recent press release, internal research shows an upwards of 80% of all packaged cannabis products are black market imposters. If this is accurate, chances are anyone who has consumed cannabis vapes over the past few years has been duped at some point or another. Not only are there insane amounts of trickster tokes on the market creating hardships for the industry that is already taking it on the chin due to complexities within the law, but it also creates safety concerns for their customers. Some of these people are getting high on mock products that may be dangerous, if not more than chewing on lead paint, according to the Green Market Report. These fraudulent products could be making people sick and creating an elevated risk for a serious health issue. Young Americans are more likely to smoke cannabis than cigarettes. A new Gallup poll finds American adults are nearly as likely to smoke cannabis as cigarettes, with consumption of the latter at a 75-year low. In fact, adults between 18 and 29 are more likely to smoke cannabis than cigarettes, a trend that could have a significant impact on the tobacco and cannabis industries moving forward. 15% of the Americans now say they smoke cigarettes compared to a high of 45% in the 50s. Public health campaigns have helped spread awareness about the dangers of cigarettes, which are responsible for the deaths of nearly 500,000 Americans every year. Conversely, the cannabis legalization movement has effectively put an emphasis on the therapeutic benefits of cannabis. A separate Gallup poll from last year showed that the Americans view marijuana as significantly less harmful than cigarettes. This latest survey doesn't directly suggest that people are swapping cigarettes for joints, but it identifies demographic trends that could further explain how the cannabis market could soon overtake the tobacco industry, despite the fact that cigarettes are federally legal and widely available at gas stations and convenience stores, while marijuana is not. In other words, young adults are largely driving the trend, signaling where things could be heading for the country overall in the coming years. 22% of the respondents aged 18 to 29 said that they smoked cannabis in the past week, while 14% said they smoked cigarettes in that time. The numbers are roughly flipped for those aged 30 to 49, 11% of whom said they smoked marijuana and 19% who said they smoked cigarettes. Meanwhile, legalization of cannabis is on a roll at a state level and could eventually earn federal support, the survey says. At the same time, an explosion in the sale and use of hemp-based CBD oil could strip marijuana of some of its medical appeal, while the mass legalization and production of marijuana could hamper its social appeal. New York governor signs cannabis decriminalization and expungement bill. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed a bill on Monday further decriminalizing cannabis possession and enabling those with prior cannabis convictions to have their records expunged. The law, which takes effect in 30 days, will make it so that the possession of up to 2 ounces of cannabis is punishable by a $50 to $200 fine with no jail time. Cuomo said that the state existing cannabis policy has disproportionately impacted communities of color and in the sign of the legislation. And with the sign of the legislation, we are ending this injustice for all, by providing individuals who have suffered the consequences of unfair cannabis conviction with a path to have their records expunged, and by reducing draconian penalties. We are taking a critical step forward in addressing a broken and discriminatory criminal justice process, he said in a press release. While reform advocates celebrated the development, it is not the comprehensive legalization bill that many had hoped would pass before the end of this legislative season. Cuomo, who included legalization in his budget proposal and negotiated with lawmakers throughout the year to get a bill to his desk, ultimately said a deal couldn't be reached in the time. Debates over how to allocate tax revenue from cannabis sales and whether to allow individual jurisdictions to opt out of allowing cannabis businesses to operate were two major issues that derailed the legalization push. Decriminalization expansion proved easier to accomplish, with the state and assembly approving the legislation in the closing hours of the session last month. Providing for expungements was a top priority for legalization advocates, who argued that establishing a legal cannabis market that would create economic opportunities would have to be accompanied by a pathway to clear roads for those with past cannabis convictions. By removing the barriers and stigma that come with these records, we clear a path for many New Yorkers to find a job, housing, and to go on to live successful and productive lives, Cuomo said. Ohio governor signs hemp and CBD legalization bill. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine has signed a bill legalizing hemp and CBD within the state. According to the Agriculture Department spokeswoman Shelby Croft, the agency plans to have regulations in place by next year so farmers can start growing hemp in the spring. The measure had overwhelming support in the legislature, where it unanimously passed the Senate and was approved by the House 89-3. Last year, the State Pharmacy Board declared CBD a controlled cannabis product. However, despite the ruling, businesses continued selling CBD products, according to the Dispatch. With DeWine's signature, CBD products are immediately legalized, and retailers can sell products without fear of crackdown. Like other state-approved hemp programs, Ohio is, for now, a pilot program. It does not require farmers to partner with universities on research, but the regulations will need to be approved by the USDA before the program is permanent, a requirement of the 2018 Farm Bill, which legalized hemp federally. A study contradicts claims that cannabis reduces opioid overdoses. A new study by the Stanford School of Medicine titled Association Between Medical Cannabis Laws and Opioid Overdose Mortality has reversed over time. Questions the finding of a widely cited 2014 study that showed states that had legalized medical cannabis experienced fewer deaths from opioid overdoses. The researchers used the same methods in the 2014 study, but found positive results did not hold up where the same time period was extended from 1999 to 2010 to 1999 to 2017. Police traffic searches dropped 70% in Vermont City after cannabis legalization. The largest local police force in Vermont is reporting that traffic searches are down 70% since the state legalized cannabis. A report from the Burlington Police Department set to be released next week will detail declining searches, which law enforcement officials are attributing to the fact that possession of up to 1 ounce of cannabis became legal for adults last summer. According to a report from WCAX, the data shows that the traffic searches plummeted for individuals of all races. The Vermont city's experience is consistent with those of other states that have legalized cannabis. In Colorado and Washington state, traffic stops dropped about 50% in the years after the states implemented commercial cannabis markets for adults in 2012, according to a 2017 analysis. And while fewer traffic stops for simple cannabis possession and importantly an accompanying reduction in racially desperate enforcement practices is viewed by a positive development from a civil liberties perspective, it could also be helping law enforcement prioritize more serious crimes. A study last year found that as marijuana possessions arrests declined in legal states, police started making more arrests for violent and property crimes. And that's it for your local and national K News for August 2nd, 2019. All right, guys, we are back. We're in the studio live. Do you have more than one headphone? All right, guys, as always, we're experiencing a little technical difficulties getting the show rolling. You guys are tuned in to WGDR WGDH. This is 91.1 FM and 91.7. We are really excited today on In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio to have Dr. Bob Melamede in the studio with us, and also our resident nurse, health tip provider, right? Jesselyn Dolan. You've been on the show before, so welcome back. We're really excited to have you in the studio today. Been trying to get you on for a few weeks now. So, guys, we didn't need that pod. Dr. Bob, we finally have you guys in studio. Everybody says, like Jesselyn was like, you got to meet Dr. Bob, right? You're going to be in the cannabis industry in Vermont, Dr. Bob, right? So it's been a while me trying to meet Dr. Bob, and now you're here. So, Dr. Bob, I mean, there's so many articles written. There's a lot of great things, and, you know, you're commonly referred to as, you know, about as famous as you can get in an underground cannabis world, right? And you bring a really interesting perspective to everything that we talk about, right? Because, you know, we do this show every week and we hear so many different things, and we're talking about articles prior to coming on to the show today about, well, how people look at this, right? And you had a great pigeonhole scientific explanation to me. So first and foremost, let's introduce you to everybody, our listeners. So Dr. Bob Melamede, tell us who you are, where you're from, and why cannabis?
Well, I grew up in New York, and I started smoking cannabis when I was 16, which was the summer that I started also college. And, you know, when you first start smoking pot as a kid, it's a goof, you know. That was the big thing, the goof, you know, and how you'd have your absent-minded short-term memory effects and you forget what you're doing. And it was all laughter and fun. So that was in contrast to my very terrible academic career. Even though I started college very young, I had no study habits. I'm extremely ADD. And I never studied. And, you know, when you go to college and you have a variety of courses like chemistry and mathematics and all of these courses that require you to actually study and learn something, that became a challenge. So my first semester, I had a D+ average, and in order to stay in college, because I went for free at City University System, you had to have a B average. And I was amazed that I got in the first place because my high school average was so low. But I think they took pity on me, you know. So it wasn't until I was a senior in college that after smoking cannabis since I was 16, and I blew myself up at 17 playing with explosives. I used to like explosives. And after that, I really turned to cannabis, thankfully. I gave up on explosives, physical ones, for ones that exploded, you know, novel thinking in your mind.
Right.
And what I learned was that I'm an idiot. Because why would I be going to college if I wasn't going there to learn? So, you know, for me, it's very difficult to pay attention for like one sentence. But I found out that if I did the reading beforehand and didn't waste my time taking notes, because my handwriting's so bad I couldn't read my notes anyway, but the key thing was to learn before you went, and then you really understood so much more. So I became an excellent student, and actually, you know, top grades. By the time I went to graduate school. So I woke up very late, and my degree was in molecular biology and biochemistry, basically molecular genetics. And that was the time just when the genetic code was being discovered. I remember as a senior in college giving a lecture in a cell physiology class to try and convince the professor that there was such a thing as message RNA, you know, which, you know, we teach in junior high school now. So it was quite a transition. I was there as we discovered the basic elements of how gene expression occurs, and that there's a common denominator among all living things, because we have, you know, the paradigm, what was known as the Holy Trinity, from DNA to transcribed to RNA and then translated to proteins. So with that as a foundation, that was really very enlightening, because now we could really see this commonality to all life. But it still left unanswered the question that has obsessed me my whole life before then and until more recently, when I finally discovered the answer. What is life? What made that common denominator? How did that come about? And I took a course in my first year as a graduate student. I took an undergraduate course in physical chemistry. And sadly, I'm a mathematical moron. And, you know, you can do really well in physical chemistry if you understand partial differential equations, which I didn't, although I've learned a lot since then. And basically, the problem with thermodynamics, thermo meaning energy, heat, and dynamics meaning flow, the conventional approach of thermodynamics basically says life cannot happen.
Right.
So here I had this conundrum here. We know life is here, and we know that we have this common denominator, and then we have this underlying physical chemistry that says it doesn't work. It shouldn't be here. And unfortunately, at that time, I discovered the work of Ilya Prigogine. He got the Nobel Prize in 1977 for creating a new field of physics called far from equilibrium thermodynamics. And the key here is far from equilibrium. So in order to appreciate what far from equilibrium is, we really should have a definition of what equilibrium is. And equilibrium is the basis of the classical physics that says life cannot exist, because when a substance, when a collection of molecules, a system is a collection of molecules, we are systems, all right? When a collection of molecules is at equilibrium, that basically means that everything that could happen in that system has happened. There's no energy left other than the random motion of whatever the constituents of the system are. So there's no information there, right? And that's the exact opposite of life, because we are highly organized structures. You know, if we were to disassemble you and put you in a big dye tumbler and throw the dye, you'd never come out. That would never happen, you see? So that statistical perspective cannot give us a foundation for understanding how we are here. And what Prigogine's work was about, what he got his degree in, which he got in the year I was born, 1947, he decided to study systems that were not at equilibrium, and in fact that were far from equilibrium. And I'll give examples of what I mean, but the key here was that he created this entire new field, and from that perspective that I'll elaborate on, life must exist because flowing energy intrinsically has a creative capacity. And in fact, that's what God is. In my understanding now of physics, flowing energy has a creative capacity, and it's manifests itself as our prebiotic soup and as the level of complexity that was powered by the sunlight in that prebiotic time, generating chemical complexity that eventually became so advanced that the solution for generating more complexity was to create life. And from that perspective, we went from single-celled prokaryotes, basically bacteria, that could photosynthesize once the earth cooled enough and the chemistry evolved enough that became the solution. And then for 1 billion, and that happened after about 1 billion years of prebiotic life. But once that happened, for another 1 billion years, you had these photosynthetic organisms capturing sunlight and trapping it by forming hydrocarbons, because that's what we are. We're hydrocarbons. And they would die, and now while they were doing all of that, they also changed their environment, because as they photosynthesized, they made oxygen. So after 1 billion years, we had now this very unique new situation where we had oxygen in the atmosphere and we had hydrocarbons that could be burned. So now the flowing energy created the next level of complexity, and that was eukaryotic cells, the kind of cells that we are. And those first organisms were single-celled organisms, protozoa, amoeba, things that we look at under the microscopes in high school and see them wiggling around, Well, again, flowing energy keeps creating more complexity in the environment and more complexity in the biology of life. So the next level was for cells to start to cooperate with one another. And the simplest multicellular organisms are the sponges, the porifera, as they're more technically known. And they don't really, they're not very smart, but they do have an inside and an outside, in the collection. So now you already have differences in what's exposed to the outside versus what's exposed to the inside. And the key to Prigoginian thinking, again, is that flowing energy creates organization. So we have now a higher level of flowing energy, that's created an inside and an outside that has to then, in some coordinated fashion, start to function with higher complexity. So you see the beginnings of ways to monitor what comes into the system, mass, which for us is monitored by our immune system. And then also information that comes into the system, sensing the environment. And for us, that's what comes into our nervous system. So those are the two ways that the collection called us is interacting with our environment, through food intake and informational intake, and likewise exchanging that, because we have to get rid of our waste. If you stop crapping, you stop peeing, you stop sweating, you stop breathing, you stop eating, any of those flows are stopped, you will die.
Right.
So we are flow-dependent structures. And to get a very simple idea of what that means, and to give us an appreciation for the kind of concepts that are being developed, we can look at some very inanimate, simple examples that we're all familiar with and we haven't wondered about sufficiently. When you have a bathtub or a sink and you have a drain pulled, you'll see at a certain point in time a whirlpool forms. Well, what's the statistical probability of trillions and zillions of molecules cooperating to form the whirlpool? From the standard perspective, it's zero. But yet you do the experiment all the time, and you always see you get the same result. You get a whirlpool, right? And that's very analogous to similar flow-dependent structures that we see. Tornadoes, hurricanes. Right. These are all flow-dependent structures that we're all familiar with, that are statistically impossible from the conventional way of, the probability of forming that is so little that it would never happen.
Right.
You know? And think of, if we transit to life, think of one protein. You know, we're made of hundreds and hundreds of proteins that are all dynamically interacting in harmony like a big psychedelic trip. But in order to produce one protein of an average 100 amino acids, we have 20 amino acids that we use. So 1 out of 20, 1 out of 20, you do that 100 times, and you come up with a number that's so absurdly large that we could never form one protein randomly. And yet here we are having a discussion about this, you see?
Breathing, eating, and flowing, right?
So my perspective is very different than the way I was educated. I was educated conventionally. You know, I believed in big pharma, I believed in science, I believed in vaccinations, you know, and I was very cautious about my cannabis use initially until I became honest with myself, because cannabis promotes self-reflection.
Right. Well, Dr. Bob,
yes, shut me up. I'll go on forever.
No, this is great. I want to talk to you about when you first started cannabis and how it hit you, and like where you, because I mean it's interesting for us because, you know, everybody has our story, right? Like where we first intervened with cannabis, whether, you know, you were brought up in a household that was totally against it and you went to college, right? A lot of people, it's the first time's college or high school at that party, right? We always talk about the gateway, you know what I mean? But anyways, it is 12:30. We do have to do a quick station ID, and we're going to get to our homie Brendan Barberio with our strain of the week. So guys, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Dr. Bob. You are tuned into In the Weeds, WGDR Plainfield, WGDH Hardwick. This is Gar College Community Radio.
I'm Brendan Barberio, your cannabis expert for In the Weeds, Prohibition Talk Radio on WGDR. This week's strain of the week is the BC Mountain Pine Warp. The BC Mountain Pine Warp is an evenly balanced 50-50 hybrid sativa indica. It's created by crossing the rare Tempest, Time Warp, and the purple pineberry strains together. The result is one gorgeous bud with a classic pine smell and a time-bending effects. The BC Mountain Time Warp is also a bud that has large leaves and is rich in forest greens nugs coated with long, thick amber hairs and a wonderful covering of glossy crystals. As each frosty nug is broken apart, sweet earthy pine aromas are released in the touch of a floral earthiness, and the flavor takes on a sweet but yet dank hint of berry with the smoothness of every exhale. The high comes soon after your first toke, leaving you lifted with a sense of happiness that permeates the mind and the body. As your mood soars to new heights, your body will drop into a tingly state which is relaxing and energizing, leaving you ready to move and complete what you need to from the top to the bottom. With these effects, there does grow to be some form of focus, and that can be great for people who are using this BC Mountain Time Warp for its wonderful effects that treat depression, stress, chronic pain, and serious mood swings. Once again, I'm Brendan Barberio, your cannabis expert for In the Weeds, Prohibition Talk Radio on WGDR.
All right, guys, we are back. That was Pine Warp. Brandon, Pine Warp.
Yeah, I told you, I'm looking at more of like the East Coast strains. You know what I mean? Now, the original two strains were both, once again, New England strains that somebody, you know, engineered in BC, and they took those phenols and ran with it. I mean, and that's an amazing, I've seen it. It looks amazing. I haven't had a chance to smoke it yet. That one's actually really new.
That's something. That's one that I haven't heard of yet. Jocelyn, have you?
I have not.
Like, this East Coast thing's got to speed up here. Come on, guys. So again, Brandon Barberio with our strain of the week. Thank you again, Brandon. A little education for you guys that don't know about our strain of the week. We try to educate you a little bit. All of our strains react differently to people, right, Dr. Bob? Right?
Absolutely.
Jocelyn. It's not about really a sativa, an indica, or a hybrid anymore, is it? Like, it's kind of changed because, I mean, now we have all these hybrids and things that can go both ways, and depends on the pheno of the plant. You can have an indica heavy or
the pheno of the person.
True, exactly.
That's
right.
why you got to match and explore.
Yeah, that's why. I mean, we talk about this a lot too when people are discouraged, right? I mean, one thing we see a lot of is bunk products, right? Products that are not what they say they are. They're marketed products. They're, you know what I mean? It seems like every week we run an ad on, especially the vape carts. You know what I mean? We'll get to that in a minute as well. But like, we're finding a lot of these products are fake. They don't have any cannabis in them, whether it's THC, CBD. They're not as advertised, and I think it's a huge deterrent for people who are trying to find health or solitude in using a product, because they're coming to this industry or this looking at cannabis as a savior because they see things on TV, or they hear articles, or they listen to our show, right? And they go buy something off Amazon, get it, and it's like grape juice. You know what I mean? We talk about we're on the internet.
No, how discouraging that would be. Literally, you're like, oh, you break nostalgia. You're like, yeah, I'm really going to get into the CBD thing. All right, let's go at it. And then all of a sudden, everything's just completely fake. Like, that's going to put a really bad taste in your mouth.
Right, and then a false sense of security within the industry to buy another product,
exactly.
Right? And then it comes to, know your grower and things of that nature. Then it gets certified, and it goes and goes and goes and goes. But anyways, we could talk about that for days. We were talking about the flow, right? A different way of looking at science, right? We're going to go back to Bob, and you were just starting to get into the whole fact of when you started to smoke cannabis, right? So tell us a little bit more about that, and then how, like you said, you had this awakening, right? So now you're understanding the ebb and flow, right? It's kind of like the circle of life, which we kind of talk about, right? Because it's like, for everything that's out there, there's a counter, right? So it's like it's the chain, the pyramid, however you want to call it, right? Evolution will continue to go. So we're talking about billions of years of cells, and here we are today talking, right? So it doesn't make sense to what you're taught, right? And then you bring up a great point that I just wanted to say is, is our education completely you're talking about pharma, right? Influenced, right? All of our education is heavily influenced. And Jocelyn, I think we've talked about this before, where like most of these nursing programs, medical industries, they're not talking about cannabis or our endocannabinoid systems, which is what we're going to get to next here, hopefully, and what your body is really made of, right? So is it like, is it the same thing they did with cannabis? You know what I mean? They shaped our whole industries to work for them, like a pharmaceutical world. You know what I mean?
You got it.
Who controls our education in this country?
Well, if you look at medical education, and remember that your endocannabinoid system, the CB1 receptor that gets you high, that whole system is the #1 neurotransmitter system in your brain, and they're just starting to talk about it in some of the medical schools,
very
in some
little,
of the countries.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's amazing. We talked to Dr. Uma a lot. She's a friend of our show.
Very good lady.
She's amazing, and she was just in Thailand, and she's traveling all over the world. She's global now. Congratulations to her. But she came back from Thailand. We had a long conversation about just the outlook there, you know what I mean? But there's it's different there,
she said. I work in Thailand.
There's an acceptance, right? It's
gaining. It's gaining. Because remember, they used to have the death penalty for cannabis.
Right, I was going to say, in the Asian countries, it's death penalties. It's heavily enforced. Cannabis is not something you want to be doing.
No, they're waking up. I was there a number of years ago. My friend Don Land was involved with trying to bring hemp forward, and very involved with government officials and advisors to the king and the queen, etc. So I met a lot of really wonderful, open-minded people. But, it's so hard to change a system like our system, we're all embedded in false science that we call reality. And once we understand another level of what really created our so-called reality, that really will change perspectives very dramatically. And that's what I'm trying to promote, is that education, because I've been fortunate enough to discover a different way of understanding how we work.
But you had to figure this out on your own, right?
Yeah, well, it took me 30, 40 years.
It's like at some point you look back and you're like, wow, this is kind of common sense. Why did I not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Stigmas, though, like when you were going to school, though, what was the cannabis stigma then? Like, I mean,
well, I was, going to school in the 60s and 70s, so it was a whole different world.
Right?
We got stoned on campus all the time, I went to all my classes stoned, and that's what made me realize again how wonderful it was for me. That this was a solution for me, because if nothing else, it made me see how stupid I was, and then make a decision to try and fix at least to be functional. It's very hard when you're wired differently, and we can go into that whole story because it's very interesting, the outcomes, of having sufficient cannabinoid activity versus not. It turns out to have a profound impact on our entire world.
Now, we talk about the endocannabinoid systems, right? And the lack of knowledge out there. There's still, I guess, a kind of a lack of science still a little bit. I mean, they're discovering things a little bit. There's a CBD3 receptor out now, right, that they've discovered, which is commonly known as something different, which we were talking about before. But now, what is this system? Explain it to us here.
Well, you see, again, our world of science is based on Newtonian thinking, linear thinking, okay, that says life can't exist. So here we're educated with all of these complex phenomena, but we don't have a foundation for understanding how they could be. So we turn to religion, for example, and we say, oh, miraculously, God made this happen. Or miraculously it happened, even though it's too improbable to have happened. Somehow it happened. So we can go into a lot of interesting directions here to just kind of give us a foundation, of perspective of some of what is real. So let's look at DNA a little bit, all right? Here we have this incredibly complex molecule. And in fact, in each one of our cells, the DNA is so long that we basically, in every cell that's so small we can't see it, we basically have 2 yards of DNA. So imagine how thin that has to be and how wrapped up it has to be to fit in something so small we can't see it. But that number becomes even more insane when you realize that if you took all the DNA from the over 15 trillion cells that we have in our body, if you took all of the DNA out of that and stretched it end on end, it would go from here to the sun and back, I think 200 times. These are realities that are beyond what we can even picture.
Right.
It's just so crazy. Well, and then it gets even crazier if we look at the difference between the standard model, so to speak, and my perspective, all right? So from the standard perspective, and I'm not denying this, I'm saying that this is true, but it is not the whole world, and in fact, I suspect it's a very small part of the world, which will become clearer as we elaborate here. But from the standard perspective, it's the accumulation of random mutations in DNA that power evolution. And somehow, miraculously, which we can't explain at all, the whole thing started. Right?
Yeah, how you start, right?
So, from my perspective, flowing energy organizes matter, creates complexity, and keeps squeezing more complexity out of what exists, as what exists eventually forms these flow-dependent structures, prebiotic that became biotic, that became bacterial cells, that became protozoa, that became the collection of molecules that we discussed in cells in the sponge. But let's go further now, because we will eventually come to the endocannabinoid system. But when you see it in the perspective of how evolution works by flowing energy, and then you see how we needed the endocannabinoid system as the solution for advancement. This is so incredible, okay? So in order for this sponge to be able to better interact with its environment, because the physics of Pregnancies, the flow-dependent structures, are dependent on extracting potential from the environment and using that to create the organization of the flow. And the only reason that that happens is because in doing it, the system, like us, we generate more waste than would exist if we were not here. From a scientific, technical term, that means we increase the entropy of the universe, which is one of the basic laws of physics, that entropy must increase. But in fact, it's entropy of a closed system must increase. We are not closed systems. If I sealed myself up in a bag so that there was no heat exchange, no air, no food, no nothing, I would die, I would rot, and eventually all my chemistry would go to equilibrium. But until that happens, I'm a flow-dependent structure, depending on the breathing and the eating and all of these exchanges, as is true of my cells, as is true of our financial situations, our health care, all of the structures of our society are flow-dependent structures. You take away the dollar bill and the flow stops happening, you see? Everything is dependent on flow, because the flow that creates us continues through us to power our society. So what I want to get into as we continue this conversation really is how the parallels within our cells and the parallels within our social structures are manifestations of the same thing, the creative nature of flowing energy and certain characteristics that are required for health of an individual, health of a cell, health of society, and the role that cannabinoids play in that. So what we see from an evolutionary perspective of the invertebrates, like the sponges, okay, was that as complexity increased, there was an indent that was formed in the ball. And that indent served as it was highly specialized. It was both an anus and a mouth. So it was specialized for transporting, the things we're talking about, the food and the waste. But unfortunately, I mean, think about it. Do you really want to, eat out of your toilet bowl? So nature solved that solution by creating a tube.
Yeah.
All right? And that tube runs through us, and the tube runs through the invertebrates as well. Okay? Now, when the invertebrates form that tube during their fetal development, they form head first, the whole, and then anus last. And that whole category of organisms, again, invertebrates, are called deuterostomes, and they do not have cannabinoid receptors. But even starting with the protozoa, you see the cannabinoids themselves, because they're part of our fundamental living chemistry, which of course includes carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and nucleic acids. Those are the molecules of life, okay? And our cannabinoids are very entwined with lipid metabolism. And lipid metabolism has a profound consequence that we are not educated, and certainly, sadly, our doctors are not educated about, because they never really get nutrition. But it turns out when we burn carbohydrates, and we'll get into this later, when we burn carbohydrates, it's a whole different phenomena than when we burn fats.
Right.
One we use to build complexity while we create damage, and the other we use to fix the damage.
Right.
All right, it's amazing. And it turns, I'll give the upfront here, our cannabinoid system regulates all of that. And that's what allowed for the development of the vertebrates. All right? So let's go back to the invertebrates that had no cannabinoid receptors. They cannot get high. So as smart as an octopus may be with his multiple brains, he doesn't have the level of sophistication of consciousness that comes with the self-awareness that's promoted by the cannabinoids. And what we see, so let's now make the jump.
So a quick question, though. Do all mammals have an endocannabinoid system?
Yes. All vertebrates have an endocannabinoid system. Every vertebrate. If you have a backbone, you've got an endocannabinoid system.
So it's not just humans, right?
No. But there's very interesting, again, everything in evolution is the flowing energy squeezing more complexity out of the system, which is changing the environment, so it requires constant change itself to be optimally adapted. And that's what our cannabinoid system winds up doing. It's an adaptogen. It's what promotes our ability to adapt by balancing how we create both complexity and the damage associated with doing that, and how we balance that with preventing the damage and by repairing the damage. If you do everything in balance, you can have a healthy individual, or you can have a healthy society with a healthy environment. If you are totally out of balance, then you get cancer and premature aging and arthritis and Crohn's disease and all of these things that are caused basically by too many free radicals, which takes us back to my educational origins, because I got my Ph.D. studying radiation chemistry. And what radiation does is it generates free radicals. It splits water and generates free radicals. And I was very involved with a complexity of living systems known as DNA repair, and specifically a subset of our ability to repair called the base excision repair system, which now takes us back again to let's look a little bit more about DNA. All right? So here we have this highly improbable molecule that's at the heart of life. It's so improbable, but listen to this insane statistic. It's probably the most successful molecule on the planet Earth, and perhaps in the entire universe. We don't know. But on the planet Earth, it's estimated that there are 50 billion tons of DNA.
Right? Everything, right? DNA's in everything.
It's everything, right? So now how does that happen? Because flow-dependent structures are what life is, and the flow keeps squeezing more complexity, that keeps changing the environment, that keeps changing the selective pressures. So here we now got up to the level of, so once we formed eukaryotic cells, which again is the basis of the multicellular organisms and of invertebrates. Once we formed those multicellular organisms, they had special powerhouses within them called mitochondria. And those mitochondria were in fact prokaryotic cells that existed in that first round of generating complexity through these prokaryotes, all right? Well, it turns out that the prokaryotes and then the protozoa that came next. But they have mitochondria, and those mitochondria were prokaryotes, bacteria that evolved by squeezing, again, the flowing energy. They evolved a unique capacity to photosynthesize. So now they could take energy from the sunlight and use it to make hydrocarbons, right? So that was the very special thing, and that's what gave us the ability to then move to the next level once we had oxygen in dead bodies, right? But these mitochondria play this incredible role because what they do is they make energy efficiently. Within them, there is really the equivalent of a solid-state device that like little lollipops that sit on the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And they pass electrons that are given to them by the food that we digest and the special pathways that digest that, in particular things called the Krebs Cycle, okay? So they're able to take the high energy electrons out of the hydrocarbons in particular and feed them into the electron transport system in such a way that, let's say that the hydrocarbons came by taking a molecule of glucose and breaking it down. So glucose has 6 carbons. So you could break it down into 6 CO2 molecules, and then you would have fully burnt it. And how would we know it's fully burnt? Well, what do we use CO2 for? Fire extinguisher, right? So obviously it doesn't have a lot of juice left in it. All right? So that would be what the mitochondria do in a very efficient way, and every molecule of glucose will give you optimally 36 molecules of ATP. ATP is the basic currency of life. It's like the dollar bill, you know? You can buy anything as long as you got enough ATP, okay? But you make it with this highly efficient process called the electron transport system that is in the mitochondria. The mitochondria, again, were free-living organisms, so they still have their own DNA in them. And the DNA that they have is still in the form of prokaryotic DNA. It's not all wrapped up into histones the way our DNA is, which is how we package that, 2 yards into the cell you can't see. All right? So let's go back and look now at some real insanity.
So basically these are like foundational building blocks, right? I mean, they're not going away. It's like when we talk about the flow, it's like it comes in and goes out, but these aren't going away. They're just building. So for billions of years, it's kind of like the theory of evolution, right?
That's what we're talking about.
We started off here, and like people believe in these theories of evolution, right? But then they also...
But I'm giving a foundation for the theory of evolution. It has that flowing energy, generalized open system dynamics, God, will naturally create solutions so that as long as you have potential, meaning the opportunity for flow, that you will generate more and more complexity. And that energy ultimately comes from the sunlight and from the fact that these photosynthetic organisms were able to basically extract information out of the sunlight. You see, the Earth is hit by high frequencies that are loaded with ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light has high frequency. The higher the frequency a photon has, the more energy in that photon. There's an equation, E equals h nu, that tells you that the higher the frequency, the more the energy, right? And therefore, the more information potential. It's like why we want faster chips, right? More decision-making per second, right? So what happens is these photosynthetic organisms trap that energy in hydrocarbons that we can then burn, and in return what we do is we re-irradiate infrared-rich light to the universe, which means we've stolen wavelengths, we've stolen complexity out of the potential to generate complexity. We've stolen out of sunlight and converted into the biosphere. Pretty wild, right? All right, so now back to...
But they teach you this doesn't make sense, right?
They don't teach any of what I'm talking about the way I'm talking about it.
No.
It's all simple if you hear the whole story.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything that any normal human being can't understand, but I can guarantee you the hundreds of doctors that I've sent, scientific doctors that I've sent explanations and videos regarding what I'm talking to you about, none of them ever get back to me.
Why? Not to derail you here, but why is it so hard for them to be open-minded about this? I mean,
we'll get into that later on once we get into it more. But the simple answer is they don't have enough cannabinoids, which regulate open-mindedness. So they're cannabis deficient.
Yes.
They're the primitive people. You see, we always evolve towards more and more cannabinoid activity, which goes back to what is it doing? It helps the CB1 receptor regulates the electron transport system by regulating calcium and other channels that are intrinsic in how the mitochondria function to generate ATP efficiently. Now, the problem with them generating energy efficiently is that if there's any leakage in that system, it leaks out free radicals. Free radicals are chemicals that have unpaired electrons that make them highly reactive. So they will react with your DNA, your proteins, your fats, your carbohydrates. They will chemically change them, which means that the role that they play in this psychedelic flow of life gets altered because you've altered what they are. So they can't do what they did because they're now different, right? And they'll do different things. And in general, there's two critical functions to these free radicals. On the one hand, the bad function is they are responsible for aging and all age-related illnesses. Not in the conventional model where, oh, we're accumulating these damages and my arthritis is because I've worn out my joint. No, that's crap. That's just simple nonsense. We are flow-dependent structures constantly making new joints, constantly making new bones. And if we don't balance synthesis of those things with the degradation that we cause by the food and the toxins, etc., then we're going to age more rapidly. Whereas if we understand how life works and live our lives so that we can be harmonious with the creative nature that made us, God, once again, generalized open system dynamics. We don't have to put it in a religious context. It's in a very simple, abstract context. But if you need religion, you can plug it into your religion. But I just like, in general, thermodynamic approach to the whole thing. So anyway, these free radicals, on the one hand, are damaging and dangerous, and on the other hand, because we are flow-dependent complex systems, what evolution has done is it's created homeostatic abilities by creating the balancing acts for everything. Everything in life, everything with flow-dependent systems is always a balance of opposing forces. So while we create the damages, we do other things to prevent them and to repair them. All right? And the mitochondria, once too many damages are being made, they will sense that they have to change their modus operandi so they don't basically screw us. And there's a number of ways that they do that. But let me give a model first so that we can get a fairly simple way of appreciating this whole mitochondrial problem. Imagine you've got your garden hose hooked up to your faucet, and you've got a turn off on the end of it, and that you've got a couple of pinholes or a bunch of pinholes in that hose. As long as the hose is turned off, nothing's leaking, right?
Right.
As soon as we turn on the hose, if we don't open the other end, it's going to leak like crazy, right? Imagine that those leaks are free radicals. And the hose that you're turning on the faucet, what's that? That's the food you're eating.
Right.
All right? And if you're eating too much, it's like having the other end closed. You can't open it enough to stop the leak. Well, those leaks are what's giving you cancer, arthritis, and everything else, okay?
Well, we have to take a break. It's the top of the hour. It's 1 o'clock here, guys. One question before we go to break. Are we healthier now than we were 80 years ago?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. We have the ability to be a lot healthier now because we have available knowledge and clean food if we demand it.
Right, but now it seems like we're sugar dependent, right? Which is, to me, one of our biggest addictions.
We're living longer still than we used to.
No, but is that an evolution theory where
what's happening, we'll go into it. What's happening now is we're going to transform from Homo sapiens into Canasapiens, where we use more cannabis now, and that'll actually change our DNA as needed to make the future. Remember, it's God's creative nature. We direct our mutations to make the changes we need. It's not a big accident.
Right.
And that's what we'll go into.
All right, we'll get right back to that. Thank you, Dr. Bob. This has been mind-blowing.
Canasapiens.
Right? I mean, we talk about it a lot, and Dr. Bob, he hits a nail on the head. I mean, there's all these theories, but the science is literally right here. We believe in a theory of God, an explosion of something, you know what I mean? But, literally, it's just been a long series of evolutions of trying to fix things that the evolution is creating, right?
You got it.
So, guys, mind blown. A lot of responses on air. We are live on Facebook. If you guys want to go check out the page, we have a video up. You can find me in the weeds, Joseph Smith, Dr. Bob, and we have Jessalyn Dolanson here with us as well. I don't want to forget that you're here. It's just so much information coming. I'm trying to absorb it all. All right,
I have
guys.
a website.
Oh,
Canasapiens.com. Canna, CANNA-sapiens, SAPIENS.com. And it's got all of the stuff I know is there. I don't never hold back anything. It's out there.
No, and if you guys go to Google and just Google search Dr. Bob, there's tons of videos. And
I got over 100
links.
videos
Oh, yeah,
there.
it's amazing. Hours and hours and hours of information. Guys, you are tuned in to WGDR Plainfield, WGDH Hardwick. This is Garrett College Community Radio, 91.1 FM and 91.7. You can find us online at WGDR.org, and you can also access 2 weeks of our archives as well from WGDR.org. Don't go anywhere, guys. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Timothy Fair from Vermont Cannabis Solutions, the recent Daisy Award winner.
I have to get my water.
You're listening to In the Weeds Prohibition Talk Radio on WGDR 91.1 and WGDH 91.7.
Sometimes you catch that funky breeze in the weeds.
All right, guys, we are back. Timothy Fair is on the line with us from Vermont Cannabis Solutions. Timothy, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing really well, Joe. How are you?
I am doing amazing. It's August, man. The summer is flying by.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
It's crazy.
Everything's starting.
Want to give a quick hello to Jesse Lynn, too, and Dr. Bob?
Hi, Tim.
So,
Hey, Jesse Lynn.
huge congratulations. We're going to step away from the law for right now and give you guys a huge congratulations. We are really honored to have you be part of our show every week. We can't thank you enough. But you guys just recently won an award. Why don't you brag about it a little bit for us?
We did found out we just won the inaugural category of best law firm in the Vermont Daisies. That's run by 7 Days newspaper. We were unbelievably happy to see that award. You know, it really gives a lot of validation both to what we've been doing over the past year as well as the industry as a whole, to see that, you know, the support of the community is everything. And to people to come out and vote for us and show us that support and show us that encouragement. It's just, it's a great thing for us personally as a firm, and it's a great thing for the industry as a whole, I think.
It is, and again, it's a great honor. We're glad to have you here, and I just want to, you know, do a little public congratulations for everybody from our show and all of our listeners. Laws. I mean, this week it was kind of an interesting week, right?
Always an interesting week in the cannabis industry.
So there was a great article out, and I believe it came out on Ganjapreneur, so it hit national headlines. It was that, you know, we're finding that our traffic pullovers with cannabis incidents are dropping like flies, right? What do you think about this? I mean, obviously you're there, you're representing people. Is it true? Is it truly dropping, or is it just that people are taking a different look at it, or?
Well, what we have to look at, again, specifically this report that just came out was the Burlington PD. You know, this is not statewide. This was the Burlington, which is, you know, the Burlington Police is one of the largest law enforcement organizations, agencies in the state. So this is a big deal for Vermont, but it's not statewide. You know, and they are equating this to the, you know, decrease due to legalization of cannabis. I think that's probably a big part of this, but I also think that there has been a big push to try to stop the racial disparities and pull, you know, in stops, which was huge just a few years ago. The current police chief in Burlington, Brendan Del Pozo, has made this a priority to try to stop the discrepancies. And I think when you combine the legalization with kind of a concerted effort, what we're seeing is this incredible decrease, which is fantastic in our minds. If they want to tie it to cannabis legalization and to the fact that police officers can no longer simply smell or pretend to smell cannabis and then pull somebody out of a vehicle and conduct a seizure of that vehicle and a search of that vehicle, that's huge, because as we all know, that happens a lot more often to those of us with darker skin than with lighter skin. So we're excited to see that. We're happy to see it. We're happy to see that, you know, we're starting to see some really good positive effects from the legalization bill that we saw in passed in July of last year. Interestingly enough, I have gotten some blowback. Some prohibitionists are now claiming that, look, this is a result, and we're taking away the tools of law enforcement to do their job. But I think that's a very small minority is taking that position. I think most of us see this for what it is, which is an excellent, excellent thing, and getting us a little bit more closer to the equality that we should have.
Yeah, it's amazing that, I mean, Burlington, I mean, for most people to know, it's a big college town, so it's not like most cities. I mean, this is literally a targeted college town. Like, it expands 80% during the day within workers and transients that actually come and work within Burlington. So it's a unique city. It's just great to see that happening in our backyard, right?
Oh, it absolutely is. You know, and again, this is one of the reasons we all pushed for decriminalization first and then legalization, was to allow the police to use their resources on more serious crimes, to not harass minority members of the community, to not conduct pointless pullovers, to circumvent the Fourth Amendment. And now we're seeing some actual tangible proof that this is exactly what's happening. It's freeing up law enforcement resources to be able to work on much more serious crimes that actually pose a danger and pose a risk to the community, and it's fantastic to see the arguments we made a year ago be validated, as opposed to the arguments of the prohibitionists, which still have yet to manifest.
If I may chime in for a second, I've had a number of interactions with the Burlington Police, and I found them to be highly professional, intelligent, and compassionate, good human beings. I'm really honored to have them.
No,
I agree. They're an excellent law enforcement agency, you know, in a lot of regards.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of law enforcement out there that are not against cannabis, I don't think. I mean, some people are in the hemp business, you know what I mean? Some people are really reaching out because, I mean, to me, I think we all have that somebody that we know that's been affected somehow and then has had cannabis come in their lives, and they can actually see with their own eyes the changes. And, you know, for me, it's like, my big thing was the young children with cancer, right? That we've seen, and I've seen it help so many young people. Then I've seen so many people pass, and you're like, man, would this have helped? You know what I mean? And are we going? Are we going? Is our attack against cancer the wrong attack?
We'll get up to that. Yes.
Totally. Right. I mean, yeah, exactly.
You don't understand how life works. How are you going to cure an illness?
Right. Well, are they trying to cure it? That's the next question. You know what I mean?
Well, they're stuck in a paradigm where they're doing all the wrong things, and because they own everything, they own the education, and that's what we're indoctrinated to believe is functional.
Right, and it
it's
just
ridiculous.
keeps going.
It's
The cycle
criminal
keeps going
insanity.
around and around while people die. So, unfortunately, this is stuff that we don't like to see. So. That being said, with this, our biggest drawback here in Vermont, and is in most states that are tuned in right now, is the traffic stuff. I mean, some states have progressed without having that be a major stipulation in their bills, like Massachusetts, because they're recreationally legal. But in Vermont, it's a big holdup. I know in New Hampshire, it's kind of being a holdup. Is how do we, deal with impairments on the side of the road? Which is a great article, and also another great article is we saw. Texas has just, and all the Department of Public Safety officers have been instructed to not arrest people anymore. So if you have under 4 ounces or under, they're not even going to fine you now. But then again, now we have Cuomo in New York, who just decriminalized, but still a fine. So I mean, everywhere it's so different.
They
right?
want to give up their money.
My question would be, what about increasing the amount of drug recognition experts rather than looking at a test that we're blowing air into that is not accurate? And what would the cost and possibility of Vermont increasing that and making that the norm in police training?
Right. I mean, what's the reality of that? I mean, we talked to Tim a lot about, these new testing boxes, these gizmos that they have up in Canada that they're using, and I mean, the sad thing is, it seems like they keep failing tests and they keep getting pushed to the next step. You know what I mean? Oh, we failed this. Oh, it's not really accurate. Well, great. Let's put it to use. Why not, right? So, again, people are failing for unneeded reasons. And, obviously, like you just said, Jesselyn, at some point, you look at a visual. You can look at something visually, right? Last week, we had Lauren Royer on from Dirty Boys Cultivation, and he was recently pulled over. And he didn't say he was harassed. He said that, the officer did a good job, but, he felt like if he was drunk, he would have had to do half the test. You know what I mean? They kind of put him through the mill on tests and this and that and this and that. And once he said, hey, and, the big thing was the smell. And, we talk about in Vermont here, Tim can explain to us, it's not about it's about the smell of fresh versus the smell of burnt, right? And because he smelled like fresh weed, the officer kind of gave him a little bit of a hard time. But now he's a hemp farm owner, right?
I was just going to say, he's a hemp farmer.
So he's like, I've been in the field all day. So, I mean, obviously, he got let away. He got let go. I was, he's telling us a story, and at the end of it, I'm like, wow, that's good. So hopefully these stigmas are going away. But it's about the education, which is what we are all talking about today. But we have Tim on the line, so I don't want to forget law questions. So, right.
I have a law question I would love to ask.
Please do.
So from my perspective, cannabis is an essential nutrient for optimizing human health because all of the illnesses that it helps with are nothing more than nutritional deficiencies in cannabinoids. So I feel that both on my constitutional rights as well as from the international treaties of fundamental human rights, my rights are being violated by having any government telling me how much of my food I can grow in my backyard. And I want to go to court for that.
No, I agree wholeheartedly with you, Dr. Bob, 100%.
No,
I mean, the endocannabinoid system is real. Cannabinoid deficiencies are real. And I tend to agree with you 100% that this should be. Unfortunately, our federal government,
I know, that's why I want to go to court.
The judiciary does not agree yet.
Right.
I want to go to court on every level because I have science that proves my perspective, and they do not have science that proves theirs. That's the difference. So I will continue with this, and I have a number of plans in place where we will destroy the insanity in a fairly short time.
Let's sit down, Dr. Bob, and think out some theories. I would be happy to work with you on this. I would love to file some news. Why not, right? Let's stir it up and see what we can get.
Right. I want to be in the corner for this one.
Well, you see, my religion, I'm an evolutionist, which is a science-based religion. So if people can have religions based on faith, and my religion is based on science and incorporates the need to consume this cannabis, then I'm being denied my fundamental religious rights to health.
Right. But now that's where it gets weird with our, we talk a lot about the government decriminalizing and stepping away and just making it legal and leaving it to the states, right? This is, we brought this conversation up last week. I think I annoy everybody when I bring up this conversation because I go, well, wait, hold on. And last week we were talking about our medical systems, right? Like, every state can't be so far out of whack where one state, you, Dr. Bob, can actually go grow your plants, your medicine, the stuff that you need, that you get a card for.
Why can't they be that out of whack? It's called states' rights.
Right. Well, then your state would tell you to move, right?
Yeah,
because
we'll move or change the laws, get active and make the change.
Because in New York right now, you have a medical card, you can't grow, but you can go to your dispensary, but they're going to limit you to be able to grow.
That's because they're idiots and people haven't taken and challenged them. We vote idiots in who perpetuate the same crap year after year. What are we, stupid?
Right. Right.
We're endocannabinoid deficient.
Actually, the people who are cannabinoid sufficient, the forward-looking people, the flips, they tend to be more mellow and adaptable. Yeah. So when you have the oppressors with their little fascist control freaks, because they're cannabinoid deficient, we sit back and say, oh, yeah, all right, But now we're finally getting smart enough to realize that it's not simply that they're oppressing us, they are killing us. And that's what's no longer tolerable, when we don't have to have children having seizures and dying from cancer because we have fascist idiots who don't understand life running the world.
Yeah. I mean, we put them there all the time. But now, speaking of politics, so it's a question I had for Tim. This past week, we had the Democratic presidential debate, and there was a lot of talk about cannabis, right? So we're talking about our politicians, right? Right now, we seem to be in a area where I think every presidential candidate is kind of pro-cannabis.
To some extent.
To some extent, yeah. We have. I can't even think right now. Yeah, some of these guys are going, we're going to be for CBD, but not for THC. Was there anything that we should take away from this presidential debate that people might not have seen in the underlying layers?
Yeah, that 10 people on a stage doesn't accomplish anything. Sound bites and clips and, getting a jab in here or there, I think is, slightly entertaining to people. I don't know. But any real policy or any real in-depth, thoughtful discussion of the topic simply didn't happen. I think it's great we're not seeing anybody up there going lock them up in terms of cannabis users. I think the fact that the overall kind of mindset of our current crop of potential candidates are, whether it's pro-decriminalization or pro-legalization, that's a first. This used to be the third rail of politics, and the first way to get anything accomplished in Washington is to get people talking about it. So I think that is definitely a positive development. The fact they aren't avoiding it, the fact they are talking about it, the fact they are thinking about it. However, I still have yet to see any politician come out with a really, with the exception of possibly Cory Booker, a well-thought-out way to get to this, which makes me think that a lot of it is simply campaign managers looking, going, hey, this is polling well. 65% of people in the United States want legalization. Go out and say you're pro-legalization. Maybe it's just a little bit cynical of me, but at the same time, what I would like to see is some comprehensive discussion, of a plan of how this is going to happen. How are we going to get this through Congress? How are we going to implement this? Why should we implement this? And not simply I'm pro-cannabis or I'm pro-legalization, but why are you pro-legalization? Where do you see? Because that's what people need to hear, especially the ones on the fence. Not the hardcore prohibitionists. They're going to stick with prohibition forever for whatever reason they want. But a lot of people who aren't decided on this, they want to hear more. They want to learn more. They want to be be educated on to the benefits of the plant, about why this should be legal. They need to be taught that the prohibitionists' propaganda that they've heard for the last 70 years is incorrect. People are not going to smoke cannabis and jump off a building. People are not going to smoke cannabis and go crazy and beat up their partner. So education is important, and what I would like to see from these politicians is an actual comprehensive platform that includes public education and the reasoning why
but they'll use all
cannabis
the wrong
should be
science. That's the
legal.
problem. They'll use the big pharma approach, just the way they are right now. I mean, it's outrageous that they can peddle Epidiolex and then come out with a stupid study that talks about liver damage, when in order to use the levels that they talked about, you'd have to consume, I calculated, about $35,000 a day of their product.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just mental illness because we have idiots running the world.
Of course, the same way they were able to say that cannabis smoke caused brain damage in mice back in the 70s, when they hooked these poor mice up to airtight gas masks and fed them the amount of 70 or 80 joints in 5 minutes. And yeah, they suffered brain damage from lack of oxygen.
Right.
No, exactly. It's that same kind of concept of warping science and warping results in order to justify the prohibitionists' mindsets.
Well, and
we need to get away
reason-
from that. We need politicians to call that out. We need politicians to say, you know what, this is BS.
They're all bought by Big Pharma. That's the whole problem. Big Pharma is fake medicine, and the combination of fake medicine and fake news gives you political whores that run the world.
Yeah, no, it's...
Don't forget lots of lobbying dollars, Dr. Bill. That's certainly, Dr. Bob. That certainly helps, too.
Yeah, the lobbying's going... It's
in Korea,
it's
lobbying
how much
is
money it
illegal. In South Korea, lobbying is illegal, and the past 3 presidents are in jail for lobbying.
Maybe that's something we should try.
Tim, I got a question for you, because I want to see if you were actually following the story or if you had some information for me on it. It's the federal court orders DEA to explain cannabis research block.
Yep, this has been an ongoing thing. We're finally starting to see traction. This is a case that started years ago, almost 3 years ago, actually, which was, the FDA approved cannabis-related research. So the next step was the DEA was pretty much told by the courts to start facilitating these applications, because any application for permitted research on the federal level, since cannabis is still a Schedule I controlled substance, needs to be approved by the DEA. So the announcement at the time, and this is back in 2016, DEA was like, okay, we will have a new policy. We're going to start actually getting these applications, processing these applications, which is going to allow people to cultivate cannabis legally, federally, to supply legitimate research. And this was supposed to have happened, and of course the DEA does the same thing they've done any time they've been told to do anything on cannabis, which is drag their feet and continue not to do anything.
There's a good side to that, though, because what that's done is it's driven people to become the citizen scientists who are giving the real answers, not for profit, but for truth.
Right, and now we're seeing more schools and private-funded testing and research being done, right? So we're not relying on the government for them to give us this research.
Right, but if we want to see any real change at the federal level, we are going to need to see some real reason. And this isn't, this is universities that want to conduct this research. I mean, Dr. Bob, you understand, the only research that was done was on the barely considered cannabis that was being grown in the University of Mississippi with virtually no cannabinoids at all, the dirt weed. That was the only cannabis that was allowed to be researched. So what you also have, though, is then you get these supposed researchers who get this really poor quality cannabis, and they conduct these poorly designed studies on it, and then come out with absurd comments like, this stuff is going to kill you, this is horrible, it has no medicinal effect. Being able to actually get legalized study of this, legalized cultivation of high-quality cultivars, and having those being studied by truly non-biased educational institutions, we can start getting some real data, we can start getting some real ammunition to show how effective this is.
Nonsense. They are so biased, they are totally bought in. The people who've succeeded in academics are the same kind of people who are running the FDA FDA, who are running the whole biomedical establishment. It's all false medicine. They don't understand how life works, and all they're doing is perpetuating big pharma and control by these power freaks.
So, Doctor,
I hope there are some out there. I hope there are some educational institutions that still have people who actually have morals and values and that care about truth.
Because you're squashed.
I might be a little naive on that, but I hope there is still some out there. And I think we've seen some great studies. I mean, the work that UVM has done with the agricultural extension for the hemp program here in Vermont has been phenomenal.
Yes, right. As a research nurse at UVM, I have to say in the last year and a half, it has taught me a lot about whether to trust our research or not.
Because it depends on who conducts the research, right?
Right. I mean, I think Dr. Bob makes a great point. I mean, I think everything is done with a point in mind, right? A direction that they want to see or go, or an outcome that they want to see, and they're trying to prove it wrong or trying to prove it right.
They have to for their own survival. You see, once you become part of the system, you can't be not part of the system.
Right.
So you have to toe the party line, and the party line is big pharma and FDA trials, which are fundamentally stupid, and yet that's what's regulating our decisions. Screw that. It's all nonsense.
And what happens? And what happens to you when you decide to buck the system and say and put your foot down and make that example? I mean, before, not a lot. Nowadays, with technology and the access to information, because it can happen so fast and spread so quickly, I think it's a different era. But how do you feel about the FDA?
Because, see, what we need is what's happening right now. In Colorado, the state is creating their own research. They're able to do their own studies. Who cares if it's FDA approved? You see, the whole FDA double-blind study is a fallacy. They're a big golden standard. It's nonsense, because what they're trying to do typically is to find an average pill that will work on the average person when you give them the average concentration, even though you've only studied it in maybe white males, and you're going to give it to black females. The whole thing is illusionary nonsense. The truth is coming out of the citizen scientists who are telling you, look, I've cured my kid's epilepsy. Yeah, I've cured my kid's cancer. I give the scientific foundation for why every one of those cures works, and the people themselves are making the cures. They're bypassing the government, and this is why states' rights are so important, because the states can do the exploration. They just can't sell between states. They can't do the interstate advertising, but they can do everything they need for freedom and health within the state. Screw the feds.
Right, and they're doing that. Like in Maine, this is a question I had for Tim. It was that Maine just released a thing that, hey, CBD in your food is going to be okay, as long as it's grown in Maine only.
Yep,
correct.
So
FDA is authority to regulate. I mean, technically, just the legal answer is FDA authority comes in when you're talking about interstate commerce. So, Maine had the reaction at first. Their Department of Health banned CBD edibles based on the FDA advisory letter from the former commissioner, Scott Gottlieb. Now, the legislator immediately kicked in and superseded the health department by legalizing statutorily CBD products. And now they've come out with a way that they feel that they can move forward with their state priorities, which is allowing this industry to grow, including the use of CBD edibles, without coming into conflict with the feds. Easiest way to do that, no interstate transport, keep it within the state. Now we're outside of FDA jurisdiction, and hopefully we will prevent any actions being taken against us by the federal agencies. Although, interestingly enough, even after that opinion has come out, we haven't seen any real FDA enforcement action, with the limited exception of companies making medical claims on their CBD products, which is where we've seen the enforcement actions from the FDA. Right. But they haven't come in at all, to my knowledge, and simply harassed or hassled anybody simply for producing products. It's all about those medical claims.
Well, it's only interstate. Issues. They only have the right to do interstate. They have no right intrastate.
Right. That's absolutely right, Dr.
So
100%.
I think that's why they're doing that, though, right? A lot of people look down and go, whoa, what does this mean? But it's actually, it kind of keeps the federal government off their back,
it
right?
makes the feds, over time, they will look so stupid that they will dissolve their ignorance. We'll flush their stupidity down the... No, there's no way about it, because cannabis saves lives. Cannabis is a health-promoting, anti-aging drug. Look at me. You're standing with me. I'm 71, you know? This is ridiculous.
But now, I mean, I don't think all states are for it, though. I mean, like
people are for it. Screw the states.
Right.
The people.
Well, we have over 65% of people in America are. I mean, it might be over 70% now are definitely in support of cannabis,
keep
right?
growing.
And then you see things like Wyoming are going, "Hey, you can't have cannabis in our state. Don't drive through our state." You know,
I'll
what
be
I mean?
testifying out there next month.
Wyoming.
Yeah,
that'll be an interesting.
Very interesting.
Because like they don't seem like they're a very cannabis-friendly state, do they?
But you have to understand, Joe, that's not necessarily the population of the state. That's their elected officials. So when you go to these states, you actually find, and this is the same in Idaho, same in Iowa, same in kind of all these prohibitionist states, most of the people support this.
Yeah.
You know, it's the ones that actually get out and vote these morons into office that are the ones that are the prohibitionists, that are the ones who are against it, and that's why you get these politicians who make these ridiculous positions.
It will continue to die off. That's
well,
the
to me,
well,
Tim makes a great point. I mean, we're right next to New Hampshire. New Hampshire right now, I believe, has over an 80% of their people want to have legalization. Right? I mean, they do have medical. It's a medical system. It's very close to our system, believe it or not, where they're allowed to have cannabis on them. Our system here is not as great as everybody wants to think it is, because literally all we have in Vermont is the access to have an ounce on you, if you're a patient.
But you can grow.
Or you can grow, right. But you can only grow...
It's so minimal.
What, 6 plants recreationally and 12 plants if you're a patient, and that's
9
different in flower and
2 and 4.
9 if you're,
people are growing
2 and 7
enough.
or 2 and
You know,
4.
all it takes is a couple of monster plants, and you got a couple of pounds. You can have as much in your home as you grow.
But if you're a good grower.
If you're a good grower. Right.
There's more and more people that are doing it.
Well, here comes my question on the growth thing, because we're talking about patients, right? We're talking about medicine.
It should be free.
There's a lot of. It should be free.
Healthcare in America should be giving free cannabis to every citizen.
Why is it not? Why is it not insured or backed or something like that? We talked. Oh man, I just lost the train
We
of
have
thought.
wealth care. We don't have health care. It's very simple.
Well,
the structure
you don't
is
make
for
money
wealth.
off healthcare, do you? You make money off wealth care.
No, right.
Right. I mean, the greatest thing about our industry right now is that a lot of our medical people that are supportive of the cannabis industry are like Jocelyn here. You guys
Nurses are not doctors. They're much better.
But I mean, general understanding though, these people are, they're investing time. You give away plants. You guys support a lot of the people in need, and it's literally, our thing is know your grower, right? Our dispensary system here in Vermont is really not a system that we're proud of. It's not a system that we want anybody to really look at or base anything off of, and it's a system that's proven failures, right? We're 5 years into it, and it hasn't done anything that we thought it was going to, and looking at how everything's working, it's not a functional system, right?
We need freedom, not freedom.
Right.
The government gives you freedom. Screw them.
Right?
I like
Smoke
that.
and mirrors, right? Smoke and mirrors, right? It's a lot of it. But anyways, Can we get the medical system that's a nationwide system? Should it be a nationwide system or should it be a state system? Should it be
So
any sort of
much of
government
what
to
we
it or
call
no?
healthcare is going to be gone because we are curing cancers in our home, I had one guy, he took enough cannabis and appropriate nutraceutical modifications. He went from 177 in his PSA reading. He had metastasized cancer, stage 4. 3 weeks later, it's clear, and his PSA is 3.
And now what? Do you know what he was
Cancers are
doing?
metabolic. Yeah, of course I did. I told him what to do.
Was it now? Is it so now? The big thing is Rick Simpson Oil too. Like
That's what we're
especially with
talking
cancer,
about.
right? So I mean, Rick Simpson isn't.
He's in Croatia.
Right, but he's not a huge doctor. He's not, owned by the pharmaceuticals.
You
like
don't
you said,
need
he's
doctors.
the home doctor that figured it out, right? He's curing thousands of people, right? You said
People
it.
cure themselves.
Yeah.
And the best cure is prevention. The more you learn about what causes these illnesses, the more you learn about what life is and how we work, the more you can fix yourself. I mean, I've reversed so much crap in my body over the past 5 years once I started to really learn what I didn't know, what I thought I knew, What a difference. It's crazy.
And now, for you, whole plants, eating, consuming, smoking, it's all of it, right?
I get up every day and I eat oil.
Yeah.
But I also no longer eat hardly carbohydrates compared to what I used to at all. That's what ketogenic diets, paleo diets turn on fat burning. Fat burning turns on cellular recycling of free radical damaged pieces. So if you don't balance damage with repair, you age.
Right.
And you get all the age-related illnesses. And if you want to put them off, then learn
Just a
how life
compound.
works, eat correctly, consume cannabinoids, and smile.
Well, this goes back to that previous question that I asked earlier. We touched on it a little bit, and this is something I really want to ask. Are we healthier now than we were
We live longer.
100 years ago?
We live longer. We have fewer of the illnesses that were cured by sanitation. And a lot of the illnesses that we attribute to vaccines are nothing more than better health, better sanitation.
Right?
And if we look at our mental health
Well-
now compared to years ago, that's a
worse,
very
I
hard
think.
question.
I think mental health may be
Right.
worse.
Well, I mean, that's where I wanted to kind of go with it. You know, because we talk about stress, and like when we were talking the other day on the phone, you were talking about your mental vision of life, right? Is a big part of it. It's your endocannabinoid systems and how you take on stress or how you view things that are out there, right? Like you said, you've even had that mind changing experiences where now you see things differently. You've learned, you've educated yourself, right? How much of an impact? I mean, we talk about a lot, stress disorders, right? Anxiety, all these things we didn't see 100 years ago. I've been in the culinary industry for a long time, right? So this is my favorite thing is the gluten, the whole gluten thing, right? Like when I started cooking, it was barely anything, right? But then when I look back at it and just thinking smart about it, I'm looking at these flours we're using. I'm looking at these processed foods that a lot of these restaurants shifted to because it was cost effective, quicker. You know, instead of making our all of our sauces and our soups and all these things homemade, our breads, we are now buying processed stuff full of chemicals, right?
Full of glyphosate.
Yes. So, and then now they're interacting with our body differently, right? Because
Glyphosate.
everything's being processed. Everything's being processed. Like, what was the number one cheese 10 years ago? Kraft cheese. Like, that stuff's plastic, right? You know, that's the stuff I think my parents
waking
feeding me
up,
when I was a
though.
kid. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm still alive. I just, right? I've just kind of like, you know, as a chef, you know, and this is a conversation like what we talk about, everybody reacts differently to things. So as a person, and I think you know, when we're in different environments, our body gets used to things. So like as a chef, they always say, you know, a chef's never going to have salmonella poisoning. Why? Because he plays with chicken all day long. You know what I mean? And your body will create a natural immunity to it after a period of time, right? And that happens in a lot of different people's environments. That's why when somebody from America goes over to another country, they usually pick up something really fast. They get sick. It's these other things that we're not used to being in our environment that impact you, right? But those people that in that environment drink the water. It's no problem, right? So. Are we healthier now, and can we get healthier with cannabis? Because I look at it from a dietary and a mental health standpoint, right?
Again, it's an essential nutrient for optimizing your health. I don't know of any disease that I haven't seen reversed. Let me give you some real profound examples. I have a friend. He has had HIV. When I first met him, he contacted me because we were lobbying in Washington, D.C. to create new money for new HIV drugs because he had it already for 25 years and was resistant to everything. And he was an HIV activist. Kaposi sarcoma on his arm. And when you come down with Kaposi, that means your immune system has failed you completely because of the HIV, and you're going to die fairly soon because we have no cures at all. And it's a painful, horrible death. I said, David, put this on it. And I gave him some oil because I had oil. I always have oil with me because I'm always eating oil, right? And he put it on his finger, and then it was on his wrist, and then 3 days later, I'm back in Colorado. He's back in New York, and I get a phone call. Bob, what the F is going on here? He says, I'm holding the Kaposi in my hand. They're not supposed to fall off. I explained to him, I said, and this guy is totally anti-cannabis at the time, right?
Yeah.
He was a minister at Saddleback Church, et cetera, et cetera. I said, listen, if you want to save your life, what you have to do is you got to consume high doses of cannabis so that you turn on fat burning, because both the HIV virus as well as the herpes virus, which is Kaposi's a herpes, they live in the differentiated biochemical mode that's powered by sugar. And when you take enough cannabis orally, you will turn on fat burning and they will go away. So he had a viral load of millions of HIV, and by the time he was working on with enough cannabis, that went to zero, even with a lumbar puncture.
Now that's interesting because we don't hear that association law with cannabis right now and medically. You know what I mean?
Well, I've been spreading it for years, but the doctors don't want to hear it. They don't want to think about how does life work,
right.
How does medicine that we're using work, is it contraindicated with life? The answer is yes. And I'll give you another, this is like the thing that blows my mind the most. It's like just, we were talking about the electron transport system, et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. Well, healthy cells balance back and forth between that indifferentiated carbohydrate burning mode. But when they make too many damages, they shut that down, okay? Well, when cells divide, when the DNA is naked and exposed, that's when it's vulnerable for free radical damage. So it turns out that all of our cells, when they divide their DNA, it's called S phase of the replication, the replication phase, when they actually turn off the electron transport system and use aerobic glycolysis, which is an inefficient way of using sugar, but it's safe. They don't make free radicals. They also do what's called glutaminolysis, where they use glutamine to feed into this metabolic mill called the Krebs Cycle to generate energy inefficiently but safely. So they turn off the electron transport system. Now, when you induce a cell to die by apoptosis, the only way apoptosis can happen is when the electron transport system is working, because that amplifies the damage and creates basically the collapse of the cell. It doesn't have enough organization to maintain itself, okay? Mm-hmm. So now look what's going on. We have a tumor. That tumor is going to have a lot of its cells replicating its DNA. Those are not going to be able to amplify any damage you give it, be it radiation, chemo, or anything else. They can't amplify the damages. So you come in with chemo and you're selecting for the survival of all of the cells that are replicating their DNA. Those cells will now survive, and because they're free radical imbalanced, those imbalances will focus DNA damages on the genes that are expressed that are giving survival. Right. So what are most of the mutations that you see in cancers? They're all in these metabolic pathways because you've selected for it, you've targeted it. Those mutations weren't there until you did the chemo.
Right. Now, okay, I got one quick question. I mean, we're getting short on time here, but CBD. I mean, it's the craze right now. We tend to talk about the whole plant and all the cannabinoids and trying to save it, but like this, I guess my two-part question: CBD, is it again a smoke and mirror thing, or is it to me there needs to be a lot more out there. But I want to hear your answer to how you just feel about the word CBD.
Well, again, everything is metabolism. That's the flowing energy. So the question is, how does CBD regulate the flow of energy? And we still haven't gotten to the key points here yet in this story. But I'll quickly do it if we're ending soon.
We got about 20 minutes.
CBD turns off the CB1 receptor. It's a competitive inhibitor with THC for the CB1 receptor, okay? So that means you're turning off the electron transport mode of what cannabinoids do. So you're now feeding the differentiated pathways, okay, that are involved in supporting those cancers, as well as all these viral infections that I'm just describing to you, okay? So by doing that, it's shifting your endocannabinoids to the CB2 receptor, which turns on cellular recycling of free radical damage components, be it DNA, RNA, or proteins. It's that simple.
Now we talk about with cancer. We hear a lot about one-to-ones. Like you need CBD and THC. They have to work in harmony. And like you said, and you need high amounts.
THC is the heavy lifter.
Yeah.
For cancer killing, because the CBD is good, but once you saturate your body with loads of cannabinoids, eating it, smoking is not, I don't like to smoke almost anymore because it only hits your head. Yeah. Whereas when you eat cannabis, it's a whole spiritual thing where your whole body gets high. And when it also bypasses, when you're eating it, it goes through the liver where it gets activated to a more potent form even.
Right. And it's not THC at that point, it's THCA, right?
No, THCA it does not get you high. THCA breaks down to form THC with heating. That's why you decarboxylate.
Right.
But the bottom line here is no matter what illness you're looking at metabolic manipulation to either cause the disease or to fix the disease, because it's the flow that makes who and what you are. It's that simple. And most plants, if you look at any of the Sanskrit medicines, the old Indian, American Indian, you look at medicines, native medicines around the world, especially the wonderful Chinese medicines that are now all getting pharmaceuticalized. What every natural drug that was used for cancer or for diabetes does is it turns on fat burning. It's that simple. It's all simple. And these people just mentally masturbate and don't understand how simple it works. I've got about 27,000 peer-reviewed articles on my computer that all look at the world through my eyes. They all support what I'm telling you. They all are written by people who don't know what I'm telling you, and when I try to communicate it with them, I never hear back. We are curing cancer. They're taught, oh yeah, in the future we'll give it to people. Right now we're doing phase 1, blah blah. Bull crap! It's nonsense.
Right? People have been
We've
cured
done it
for
all.
years.
We know that cannabis helps with autism. We know that it reverses arthritis. We know I got one guy, MS patient, 100% disabled in Serbia. He now runs in jump ropes.
Now, if cannabis was in our diet, you know what I mean? Say it was in everybody's regular diet,
and
it was a focus, right?
Yep.
Would we be a healthier nation?
Absolutely. That's why the government should be giving free cannabis. That should be the only health care that the government gives us. Get out of the way, leave us alone, and let us enjoy life instead of sucking the breath out of our society.
Well, Ed Rosenthal says the same thing, right? Free the weed, right? Free the weed, right? So it should be free to all the patients, and there needs to be a way to figure it out.
We are all patients because we're all dying. The minute you're born, those that aren't busy being born are busy dying. And the key is to figure out how to be busy being born. Yep. When you are fat burning, that allows stem cells to expand. In order for them to differentiate and become, say, new neurons, they need the CB1 receptor. So you got to get high. That's why psychoactive cannabinoids are in mother's milk. The first thing a mother does is get the baby stoned. Should we arrest mothers for getting their baby stoned? Or maybe we should just arrest all mothers for walking around with paraphernalia.
Right.
I mean, this is insanity.
Well, the stigma's crazy, but this is going to bring us to our last little point, because I want to give Jessalyn a few minutes to talk with you, Bob, as well, because I'm sure she's been sitting here with her mind racing. Pregnancy, right? You're a doula. So there's been a lot of both ways about how cannabis affects pregnancies, whether the mother is smoking or ingesting, or the fact of. How do you feel about that? I mean, a lot of people talk about, hey, the endocannabinoid system's there, like it's part of development. Some people, say that, I just read an article the other day that kind of went against the fact that, cannabis inhibits our brain function up to a certain point of age, right? And then after that, our brains won't be inhibited by this, so it's not withholding our knowledge or our learning capabilities, right? How do you feel about cannabis with pregnancies?
It all depends on who and what you're talking about. Are you talking about a woman with cancer? If you go to Cannabis Radio, there's a woman who treated herself with the things I've suggested and completely got rid of her cancer and had a totally healthy, happy baby. It's been used historically in childbirth, involved with oxytocin, etc. Instead of giving injections, let your body take care of it. I've got 3 ex-wives and a bunch of kids and grandkids, so they all knew what to do, the right thing. But on the other hand, I don't think that a woman should just be getting stoned all day long. Unless that's what was needed. For example, I know someone who was beaten all the time. She had terrible stresses, and consuming cannabis all the time is what allowed her to be a healthy mother and provide her children. So it all depends on the circumstances.
Right.
We are individuals, and we don't need rules telling us how, we as an individual should be functioning.
Right.
We need to learn what life is. We need to learn what we are, because we understand what life is, what our nature of our unfolding is, and how we can improve our family, our friends, our community, our country, and the planet. It's all part of the same big chemistry set, the chemistry set, planet Earth.
We're all here together, right? So, Dr. Bob, we're going to wrap this up here shortly. I'm going to give Jessalyn a little bit of time before we play her health and wellness tip that we're going to end our show with. Tell people how they can get a hold of you, where they can find you, how they can reach out and connect with you, or any sort of events or things you have coming up.
You know, I'm full with people. There's 1,000 people waiting. They only let you have 5,000, and then Canna Sapiens, Canna CANNA Sapiens SAPIENS.com. Everything I do, I put on there, and I have also well over 100 videos on YouTube and around the place. So if you punch in Dr. Bob or Bob Melamede, cannabis, you'll get more than you want. And if you want to spend hours learning, you'll know what I know, and you'll be able to apply it to yourself and your family and friends, and hopefully help you. Right.
I mean, the knowledge is out there, the education's out there. You just have to sometimes dig a little harder than what they're originally going to feed you, right? So, Jessalyn, thank you again for coming in. We have your health and wellness tip coming up next. But so you sat around with us for this whole show. What do you have to say? I mean, there's so much going on. I don't even know where to even target a question for you right now.
There is. Well, two things, I guess, come to mind, kind of sitting here and getting to hang out with Dr. Bob and hearing what he says. One thing I quickly mentioned to you before, Joe, was when you stepped out of the room, Dr. Bob, I said, one thing I love is the complexity of what you're talking about and how deep and entrenched that knowledge and that science foundation is. But the reality is this cannabis plant is also part of simplicity and the experimental phase that patients should be doing themselves. Yeah. And I love how you also honor that aspect of it, of realizing screw the science and the research in some ways. What works for you might be different than what works to the person sitting next to you, and figuring that on your own. So kind of that's how I look at this cannabis community, and what I'm doing with my role in it and my, I guess, beliefs and advocacy is I started as an herbalist decades ago, then went to nursing school. So to me, it's almost removing some of the science and bringing back that intuitive, natural aspect to it. So,
but that is the science, just they do the wrong science. Yes. That's the whole point.
Yes.
We're submerged in fake, big pharma-driven science.
Yeah.
And it's, it's wonderful for me because it shows me all of the details that I can then apply to what I understand, which becomes then simple for everyone else. All of those things, all they do is support the concepts I'm sharing with you.
Right.
And these concepts are simple. And that's why I have these 27,000 peer-reviewed articles. I'm in the process now of working with a veterans group. We're going to create an international veterans group. We're going to put a front end on my database. We're going to make it public. And we're going to, we have a lot of other plans that I don't have time to go into now. But
no. Oh, good. We should work together.
Yes.
I give all veterans free seeds or clones.
We're going to create a whole disabled veteran CBD company that's going to be international and coupled with new clean energy methods that Vermonters, including Bernie and our governor, don't want to listen to, including, sadly, David Zuckerman. There are ways to create clean energy in Vermont. A career is now going to fully embrace that. So these new technologies, and people are just too stuck in their stupidity. But we will triumph in the end because the truth always emerges in the end.
Now, Dr. Bob, I wanted to ask you a question. This is something I've asked Jessalyn before, too. It's the stigmas or the stereotypes. How have you been treated? I mean, you've been doing this a long time, I guess. Like, for me, I'm sitting here and I listen to you. I'm like, dude, how's the government not reached out to you and been like, shut up, or try to quiet you somehow, you know what I mean? Because it's like, this is the information that people are searching for, that we talk about every day, that the government refuses to believe that exists, right? For you in all your years, I mean, obviously we talked about the 70s where kind of cannabis was still okay and highly celebrated, right, in our movements. Then we get to the 80s and the 90s where now it kind of changes, and the other drug wars kind of come forth with like cocaine and heroin and all these other opioid movements, right? Just from your standpoint personally, how has any of these stigmas affected you, and have you been hit hard by them?
No, I haven't been hit at all because I've always been open, and I've always made sure to do what I could do. I unfortunately have a fairly decent brain. So it was like back in 1985, for example, I was issued a patent on DNA sequencing. But that didn't become manifest as a business until, I think, 2005 or 3, pyro sequencing. You know, they bought out my patent, they made money.
Yes, now
You know, and I started Cannabis Science, which unfortunately was a company that didn't fulfill my dreams of helping everybody the way I wanted it to. Maybe sometime it will, but I haven't seen that. I've seen pump and dump. And unfortunately, I got out of that when I had a heart condition. And I left Vermont. I left Colorado for Vermont. I retired from the university. I retired from Cannabis Science. And that's when my brain really exploded with because all I do is sit and read all the time. I'm stoned from morning till night, and I do nothing but read science. And then when I find particular little easy things that I think would be communicative and functional, I spit them out on Facebook and I put them into my webpage. And as I develop new concepts, they're out there now. So my whole concept now is that when you have a cell that's healthy and happy, it tries to maintain stability. When you have a cell that's dying, it'll focus on making changes. This is the whole novelty now.
Right. And it's kind of like a cannabis plant, too, right?
Flowing energy will drive solutions, will create evolution. That's why it is God. All pervasive energy in the universe that is creative when it flows.
I love the flow. I just have to throw in there, one of the things I talk about as a nurse when we talk about CBD and what you're looking for in your cannabis products is flow. Full spectrum, lab tested, organic, whole plant, and then I always add the ERS for flowers, because then I get into the ethical pricing, the responsible agriculture, and the sustainable packaging. So I love the flow, because as nurses, that's something we definitely talk about and advocate for all the time.
That's what it is. We are flow. We're flow-dependent structures. If you cut off the flow, you're gone.
And to look for our medicine, we should be looking for flow or flowers.
Well, what you want are medicines that manipulate your flow in a way harmonious with flow. What unfortunately Big Pharma has done is they've taken the plant medicines and then they modify them so they could patent them, but now they don't have the precursors that made them, and they don't have the degradation products. So you've upset the flow. You perturb the flow. You throw rocks in the stream, and the stream goes around it.
Yeah, it's isolated.
Exactly. Now, guys, we're out of time, unfortunately. I got to say goodbye. I want to thank you, Dr. Bob, for coming in with us today. It's been amazing. We got to make this a more common thing to bring you on. Jessalyn, thank you for coming down. I have your health tips coming right up. Brandon Barberio for tuning in with us from Arizona. It's you kind of floored us all today. We didn't have much to even put in there.
I know.
It's been an amazing day, and we're honored to have you in. Guys, check us out on Facebook. We are In the Weeds, Prohibition Talk Radio. We do have a fun group page, and we're all over Twitter and Instagram as well. Jessalyn, Vermont Cannabis Nurse Association, right? How else can people get a hold of you?
Facebook through Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association, or my email is greennursevt@gmail.com.
And then Dr. Bob also has his website as well, right?
There's cannasapiens.com, and I think I also have one, I don't know, maybe robertmelamede.com, but I haven't done much with that one. I was trying to set up a foundation to make money to help sick people, but the government closed all my bank accounts, and I could never implement things.
It's amazing what the government's doing right now, right?
Yeah.
Well, guys,
wouldn't it be nice to have a government that helped people?
There's no money in making in that, right? All right, guys. Well, that's it for our show today. This is In the Weeds with Joseph Smith and Brandon Barberio. We'll talk to you guys next week. We're going to leave you with Jessalyn Dolan and her health and wellness tip.
Hi, this is Jessie Lynn Dolan, cannabis nurse researcher, educator, and consultant, and organic cannabis and hemp farmer. I founded the Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association and am bringing you a weekly dose of whole plant to whole person medicine and healing tips. This week's tip comes from Annika McCann, operating room registered nurse, health coach, and clinical herbalist with Primal Botanical CBD products. Cannabis for migraine, when ancient remedies meet modern science. Did you know a migraine is a neurological disorder, and a headache is merely one of the symptoms? Other symptoms include the infamous nausea, vomiting, and visual disturbances, but can also include brain fog, extreme sensitivity to light and sound, fatigue, stiff neck, slurred speech, difficulty finding words, dizziness or vertigo, numbness or tingling, and weakness or partial paralysis. Some people have such severe symptoms that they can appear to be having a stroke. Migraine can be catastrophically disabling for an individual, and it's an expensive public health burden. Healthcare and lost productivity costs associated with migraine are estimated to be as high as $36 billion annually in the United States. Migraine is a tricky and exceedingly difficult disorder to treat. A treatment that works for one person may have no effect on another. A migraine sufferer may go for years trying dozens of different medications, devices, and interventions before finding a combination that helps. Cannabis may be the oldest migraine remedy ever. It has been used as a headache treatment for thousands of years. According to neurologist Ethan Russo, written documentation of cannabis as medicine is nearly as old as writing itself, with examples from a broad range of ancient cultures. Cannabis was a highly revered headache remedy in Europe for centuries and was the preferred treatment for migraines in Europe and America from the early 1800s until 1941, when it was dropped from the official U.S. pharmacopoeia and essentially lost as a medicine. Despite its Schedule I status and limited research, scientific literature includes some very encouraging studies on cannabis and migraine. Anecdotal evidence abounds. Cannabis may exert its migraine-soothing powers in multiple ways, influencing neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, and glutamate, mediating inflammation by several different mechanisms, boosting levels of endogenous opioids, acting as an antioxidant to combat oxidative stress from free radicals, which some researchers believe is the common denominator underlying all migraine triggers. Augmenting the body's endocannabinoid system, which is likely to be deficient in migraine sufferers. Because migraine is such a complex disease, successful treatment is too often tantalizingly out of reach. Will cannabis, whether from hemp or marijuana, work for migraines? There's only one way to find out: experimenting. Thankfully, access to both